Good afternoon, everybody. For the record, my name is Frank Baker, Boston City Council District 3. I'm the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. I want to remind you that this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast live on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, FiOS 964, and streamed on www.boston.gov/city-council-tv. Silence your cell phones and other devices. We will be taking public testimony at the end of your testimony. If you would like to register, please email, if you wish to testify video conference, please email juan.lopez@boston.gov with your full name to sign up. And you may also submit written testimony. Today's hearing is on docket 0324. This matter is sponsored by the mayor and was referred to the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation on February 1st. The docket summary, docket 0324, is a message and order temporarily extending urban renewal plans in the city of Boston until March 31st, 2025, or passage of a proposed relevant home rule petition. I'm joined here by my colleagues, President Flynn, Councilor Bach, and Councilor Murphy. And I think we'll start with, and the subject is urban renewal. Do you have an opening statement, Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have an opening statement here to listen to the testimony from the BPDA leadership team. Had an opportunity to meet with them previously as well, and just want to acknowledge the professional dialogue back and forth with the BPDA team, and looking forward to the conversation. I do want to acknowledge, and I have acknowledged in the past, when I started as a District 2 City Councilor, working with one of the panelists, Mr. Breen, but it was him working with me that was able to move the BPDA into doing language and communication access, especially to the Cantonese-speaking community in Chinatown. So I'm always thankful for his professionalism and hard work in making sure that my constituents were heard during the development process. So I want to acknowledge that that positive working relationship with Mr. Breen and the entire BPDA team, as well as obviously the Mr. Jameson. I'm not saying Mr. Breen is the boss here, Mr. Jameson, you know, but it's good to be with everybody.
Thank you, President Flynn. Councilor Bach?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to thank the BPDA team for being here. And I know that the last time that we were discussing this last spring, the council really felt the need for like a lot more sort of detail parceled out by urban renewal zones and by council districts. And so similarly, I've had a chance to chat with the team before this, and so I'm looking forward to the presentation today, but I just want to thank them for the kind of deep dive that went into this, because for me, that's the really important thing, is that we're making decisions on this front really based on like the data and the kind of detailed level stuff, and especially for those of us who are district councilors, that's really important to kind of think about the impacts on the district. So I appreciate that in advance, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Councilor Murphy?
Sure. Thank you for being here. Looking forward to the conversation. And also thank you for giving us that information. I was here also last spring when it was first brought up. And for us to vote on something that's going to have such an impact, it's important to have this detailed level of information. So looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. And if somebody could, in their remarks, if we could specifically say when we met last year. I know it was last spring. What was the date? And that was our extension out to when that was, Chris. And also, is there any reason, and in whoever's remarks you can answer this, what was the reason for pairing together the extension till March 25th with the proposed home rule petition? Was there any, is there any reasoning for putting those two together? And so if we could remarks at some point to answer those two things. And whoever would like to start, your name, your affiliation, and it's all you.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to see each of you. My name is Arthur Jemison. I'm the Chief of Planning and the Director of the Boston Planning and Development Agency. I'm joined today by Ruben Cantor, Senior Advisor in our office, Chris Breen, our Urban Renewal Manager, and I've got to my right Lisa Harrington, our General Counsel. Pleased to be here to answer all the questions you and citizens have about our proposal. So as you said in the introduction, we have proposed that the current urban renewal areas be extended for approximately 2 years. The reason for that is we've submitted a home rule petition which would alter our current powers, and specifically the things that charter them and the findings we need to make in order to use them. There is a relationship between those two things. What we did not want to do, as Chris will identify in a moment, was we did not want to put at risk any of the open space or affordable housing units in the city that are currently controlled by those LDAs, and which are a function of urban renewal, that retain the affordability of those properties. If there was a time where those rules were not in effect, there is a risk that some of those properties could become eligible to be acquired and not continue to have the public benefits that are associated with them. So I think you're asking a great question, Councilor Baker, in that case. So I want to make sure we answered it immediately as to why we thought these two things were linked and why they had urgency. Since I have the good fortune of having expert opinion and knowledge here, I think what I'd like to do is let Chris go through a quick backgrounder, some elements of which many of you have seen and heard from myself or other members of the team, but I think it'll be good for you and for our listeners in the audience to have heard them. Without further, with your permission, I'll ask Chris to speak to it.
Thank you, Chief Jemison. So,
Chris, before you start,
Yep.
will you just explain to us what an LDA is?
Sure. We have a slide for that in the
Oh,
presentation.
okay, then we'll get into it.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I just like people to know, we know what it is,
Yeah.
but some people at home might not.
it
So
can
we'll
be
get,
a-
as long as we're gonna
yeah.
get into it. Okay,
Yeah,
excellent.
We'll
Thank
sort of
you.
break it down for not only you, but the viewers at home, because I know lots of folks in the community have
Both viewers at
confusing-
home, Chris, we need to do it for.
It's streaming, right? All right. So my name is Christopher Breen. As Chief Jemison stated, I am the Urban Renewal Manager here at the BPDA. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge some of the many staff members who worked on this presentation regarding the urban renewal data analysis that we intend to show you guys. One in particular is Zach Gagne. He's the urban renewal sort of assistant. He's done some amazing work sort of digging through countless files over many decades and sort of making sure that when we analyze these LDAs, we're looking at them from the right perspective and we're interpreting them the right way. And we look at them from a community perspective and a planning perspective, and we put weight on those sort of restrictions that these LDAs hold in place. Another person is Sophie Schmidt, and she's our data operations manager. And the things that she does are so crucial to everything that we're going to present to you that I don't understand them. Like, she's done an amazing job. She's able to catalog and sort of take these essentially numbers and information that we provide her and put it into real-time sort of graphs and charts and unit counts and the number of folks affected per district and per urban renewal area. And she's extremely talented at what she does. And then, of course, we have Ruben Cantor, who's a major part of sort of transformation of that this urban renewal team has experienced over the last year. Those are all three new folks to the agency, and I think with the data analysis you'll see the changes and the improvements and how it's been analyzed just deeper and better, and it will be able to translate to you folks in a way that'll hit hard. And of course, our general counsel, we have Lisa Harrington, and the entire BPDA legal team. I couldn't do anything that I do without them. They're colleagues and they're my friends, really. So with that, we'll sort of get started here.
Can I just, we've been joined by Councilor Louis Jean and Councilor Fernandez Anderson. Do you guys have opening statements? Do you want to?
Just wanted to say, thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to learning about what the proposal is here, so that we, get it right when we're thinking about investments for public good. We obviously know the history and oftentimes how folks look at urban renewal and BPDA. So I'm looking forward to hearing what this new vision is for our city and investing in public good. Thank you.
Councilor Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No statements for me. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you for being here. Looking forward to conversation.
So this first slide, why doesn't urban renewal extension matter today? Essentially, we put this up there because we know before we dive into this very data-driven sort of material, it is of course important to acknowledge urban renewal's poor reputation in the city of Boston, and to continue to understand any harm or trauma that has been caused in the past due to the displacement of individuals, families, and communities throughout the city of Boston and its inner city neighborhoods. I'm just going to go to the next slide. This slide, when I look at it, is essentially saying, why are we here? And as we look back, this slide is a reminder that about a year ago, 11 months ago to be precise, the Boston City Council requested that we do a deep data dive to better understanding the impacts of allowing 12 of the existing urban renewal plans to expire. Next slide. Oops, sorry. Did I go one too far? All right. Timeline. Councilor Baker, as you requested, this timeline is a visual representation of where we have been over those last 11 months. The vast majority of these months has been spent reviewing and analyzing thousands of documents and legal covenants through the 65-year history of the agency. And as well, we went above and beyond and reviewed many third-party covenants that work in conjunction with our outcome analysis. So when we look at harms, we looked at our own documents, our own LDAs, our own certificates of completion, but we also looked at third-party documents, things like affordability contracts that are not necessarily in our hands, but we went to the Land Records Court and we pulled them, and we worked with the Mayor's Office of Housing and got their input into certain parcels and buildings that they felt could potentially be at risk, and we sort of took all of that information and sort of collected it and collated it and put it into a risk assessment that we're going to show you today.
And you'll show us the third-party ones also?
Yeah, we have a slide.
Okay.
So we are here before you today to present those findings and ask for a 2-year extension of the plans while the larger Home Rule Petition goes before you and the state legislature. It should be reminded that if no action or vote takes place prior to March 31st of this year, about 6 weeks from today, most land disposition agreements that are associated with the remaining 12 plans will expire and no longer be enforceable. What is an LDA? And just to remind the council or folks watching at home, a land disposition agreement is quite simply a covenant or a legal contract between a buyer and a seller. In this case, the BPDA, or preceding it, the BRA, was the seller and no longer owns the property, but places a use restriction on said property to the new private landowner. These LDAs are directly linked or kept alive only due to the many extension processes of the 12 remaining plans. LDAs allow for an enforceable public interest on privately owned parcels and give the public agencies, including ourselves, leverage to maintain important planning uses. These important use restrictions are things like income-restricted housing that are written into land disposition agreements, elderly preferences, that are written into LDAs and not a part of the zoning code, various open space requirements in towns and communities, particularly downtown, that have very few open spaces, and community and cultural use protections in our downtown neighborhoods like Roxbury, Charlestown, Chinatown, and the South End. To sort of give you a look at the LDA universe that we looked at, basically in our analysis, we looked at 832 individual land disposition agreements. Again, land disposed of by the agency, an agreement was placed on. So we read through 832 of those that are spread through 12 urban renewal plan areas in the city of Boston. These LDAs have various land use restrictions, as seen on this chart in front of you or on your television screen. And those land use restrictions total over 33.8 million square feet of restricted land in the city of Boston, restricted beyond what the zoning code allows. To give an overview of one of these important land use restrictions, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Ruben Cantor.
Thanks. So, thank you. My name is Urban Cantor, Senior Advisor for Strategy and Operations at the BPDA. Thanks, Chris, for that, for starting us off. I want to talk about the income-restricted units in particular that are protected. Nearly 12,000 units of housing, of income-restricted units of housing, are protected by LDAs. These are the ones that Chris mentioned before have third-party agreements as well. And most of those third-party agreements are with MOH, formerly D&D, that have, in many cases, extended the life of the restriction beyond the LDA, but not into perpetuity.
So that would be someone that built the building 40 years ago, the LDA goes away, and then it all becomes, if the LDA were to go away.
So if the LDA were to go away in the case of income-restricted housing, in most cases, the MOH agreement would remain in place.
Yeah.
But those agreements are generally in the 20s and 30s. So they potentially would go away over the course of the next 15 to 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing here is just making sure that we have 11,748 units, probably families, that we're protecting right now. Of those 4,400 of them appear to not be at risk based on based on Chris's deep dive into the data, Chris and his team. But there are several thousand of other units that are at risk over the next 20 or 30 years, and those are the ones that we are here in particular wanting to protect for now, for the next 2 years, until we can get to the Home Rule Petition that will, we believe, protect them longer. These agreements, the LDAs, give MOH additional power to create extensions and other agreements with those private developers to ensure that we are maintaining the affordability on these units. So as you can see on the next slide, the largest share of those units are found in districts 2 and 7 by a pretty wide margin. There are some found in districts 1, 3, and 8, and a very small number in District 4. We can go into, we have slides that are a part of the packet that I don't think we're showing today that go into deeper dives at the council district level. So that's available for you all and in the online version, but I don't think we're going to go through all that detail at council district by district today. And you can see in the next slide that we also parsed it out by urban renewal area, the 12 urban renewal areas that we're seeking to extend. There are a couple that don't have any income restricted units. They have other LDAs in them, but almost all of the 12 plan areas have some number of income restricted units. I'll pass it back to Chris to go into some brief examples.
Just to give the council and the folks at home an example, or one example, of a land disposition agreement that has an income restricted housing restriction on it. This is the Concord House, and it has an LDA that covers 2 parcels. One is an all income restricted housing development with units up to 4 bedrooms. The other consists of a park and adjacent parking lot for the residents that live in either those 1, 2, or 3, or 4 bedroom units. The LDA expires with the plan. So if the LDA was allowed to sunset, that LDA would no longer be enforceable. The affordability for the project expires in about 17 years from today, and MOH monitors it. The LDA currently enforces the parcel to be for low and moderate income families. The LDA also enforces the park and the parking lot, of which the landowner has approached the city to develop as market rate housing. If the plan is not extended, the city could lose leverage to maintain the current uses on these two sites or to extend the affordability of the affordable housing project site. That's just one example. Next. There are other examples all throughout the city. We're not going to go into them in detail, but just to give you an idea, the Cox Building is one building in Roxbury. That was a rehabbed building in the 70s that the Mayor's Office of Housing is a little bit afraid of potentially losing the affordability, and the affordability ends in the next year. The LDA would expire with the plan, so the LDA would expire in 6 weeks. So our ability to enforce any sort of affordability would go with it. There are other examples in Charlestown. We have the Main Street townhouses, where there's about 10 units at risk in the next decade. In Chinatown, you have the Taitung Village, where there are 224 units at risk in the 2040s. So there's thousands of units all across the city in various decades, some in the 2020s, some in the 2030s, some in the 2040s, and so on. Next slide. Another sort of really important thing that we identified in land disposition agreements are these things called senior preferences. Senior preferences for housing are important because it helps ensure an aging population gets to age in place and have accommodating facilities within their own home communities. Senior preference is specifically written into 13 LDAs throughout the city. This allows for 1,700 individuals and families to remain often in the city that they've made home. Most of these preferences expire with the plans. So you can see at this chart, there's about 1,734 units that have senior preferences. Some are just for seniors. Some allow for just one senior to live in the unit, and other folks can be younger. They can have daughters and grandchildren in that unit. But you can see the breakout by district. District 2, District 7 is the most affected, District 1 as well. So about 1,600 of those units expire March 31st, and then about another 120 live on in the next decade. There are no third-party protections ensuring senior preference. They're strictly with the LDA. A really popular, or excuse me, a really famous example of this came around 2015, 2016 in the North End or the downtown waterfront area of Boston. The North End Nursing Home is a relatively famous case when an LDA had specific language in it that required the site to be used to house seniors and provide subsequent services to those seniors. Back in 2015, 2016, there were discussions that the use would be going away, with many seniors being displaced to other facilities for a market rate project that would replace the North End elderly building. The city, at the time, the Boston City Council, leaned heavily on the land disposition agreement and leveraged the LDA to maintain the existing uses for this care facility that still functions today. Next slide. And there are examples of senior preferences all throughout the city. You see the Bricklayers Building in my hometown, Charlestown, in the Navy Yard. You see the Smith House in Roxbury that has 132 senior units where the seniors get preference. And you see Symphony East and Symphony West over in Fenway.
Are those senior buildings? The Symphony,
Yeah, I believe.
all senior?
For open space, I'll turn it over to Ruben.
There you go. So talk a little bit about the open space that is protected by about 230 LDAs in the city. Currently, 1.84 million square feet of open space is being protected by LDAs, and about 48% of that 883,000 square feet is deemed potentially developable. And by potentially developable, I mean land that is not owned by the city. We are assuming that most city land will remain in city ownership, as well as land that some urban planners have gone out and deemed undevelopable. Nonetheless, that still leaves nearly half of the space that the LDAs are protecting as potentially developable. We would like to make sure that we are protecting that that land into for the next 2 years.
So how does that land become developed? What would that, so the developer now wants to come to the BPDA if we have the urban renewal powers in place and basically ask if they can develop it?
Right. And
If
Chris,
the LDA goes away, then they can just develop it?
it would give them a lot more power because it would not have the protection of the LDA behind it. There may be other powers that the city could use, but this is a power, and Chris is going to give an example
on
of
the
one in
site,
Charlestown where this was used. But this is land that could be owned by, and largely is owned by private developers, and the restriction on that is that it remain open space and because of the LDA that's in place.
Yeah.
And so you can see on the next slide, the 5 council districts where the open space resides. Again, much of it is in District 7, with some sprinkled out through Districts 1 through 4 as well. And as noted, a lot of that land, nearly half of it is potentially developable, a little bit less of that in District 7. And Chris, I think, is going to go into some examples.
Yeah, this is a case example that may answer some of your questions, Councilor Baker. To put it simply, this land disposition agreement required open space. It was in an area of Charlestown known as Bolton Place, which is a fire lane. It's kind of a dead end. There's no parking on either side. The parcel was required to remain as open space until the end of the plan limits. When a developer proposed 2 single-family projects, the surrounding neighbors asked the BPDA to maintain this open space restriction. We had a public meeting. There was no support for the project, and we maintained that restriction according to the existing Charlestown plan that had preferences for light, air, and open space and fire maneuverability on this sort of dead-end alley.
And that's a photo of it down there on the bottom?
That's a photo.
That's the end of the street?
Yeah, it's the end of the street. It was used by neighbors quite often.
Is it a garden?
There's a garden. The current neighbors are moving, but the subsequent street, it's a little bit tight in parking. It's very dense. Charlestown has some of the lowest open space in the city of Boston per district, and the neighbors do value open space and all different types of open space. We have some large parks, but we don't have small pocket parks and sort of medium parks and little places for respite like the neighbors used this. So another example are some other examples throughout the city. You have open space LDA in Charlestown. That's at 24 Washington Street. You have another one at 32 Homestead Street in Roxbury, and you have another one at 6163 at Lawrence Avenue. That's currently used as a landscaped, sort of well-maintained yard with parking.
And that's attached to that 3-decker there?
Yeah, the parking is used for it's a rental next door, and those renters use the open space for recreational uses and summertime barbecues. Next topic we're going to talk about is the last major sort of tentpole of urban renewal. We have community and institutional uses. And this is relatively a broad category, but those types of uses are most often represented in LDAs as things like community centers, performance theaters, or art galleries, or cultural sites. We identified about 56 of these use restrictions, with the vast majority expiring with these urban renewal plans. Other types of uses, you see job training sites, children's play areas, monasteries, churches, libraries, museums, sober houses, things like that, that are protected as uses by the land disposition agreement. Next slide. One particular use of the community institutional land restriction comes at Boston City Lights. It's in the south end. And this is an example of a performing arts center, mostly used by teens. And below is the performing arts center. Above are about 8 to 10 multi-million-dollar residential condos above. In the 1970s, the building was abandoned and rehabilitated by the current landowner of Boston City Lights. Today, the LDA requires that each time a condo unit above is sold, 2% of the sale goes directly to Boston City Lights. That money is used to help kids from the South End, Chinatown, Roxbury, and other parts of the city go on yearly field trips to Maine and do other activities. The average sale price of the above condos is $1.5 million. Every time one of those condos is sold, the LDA requires 2% goes to the youth activity below. And if the LDA was to expire, which it will, that is no longer enforceable. Other examples throughout the city, some community use restrictions. We have Boston Metro Alive. That's a site that's required to do job training, where job training takes place for those transitioning from difficult times and homelessness. We have the Harriet Tubman House, which is, although a very controversial LDA, the existing LDA did require that the first floor, at least half of it, remain in possession of uses, and the other half to be income-restricted nonprofit space into perpetuity. Now, the zoning code allowed only for residential. It did not require for any sort of community cultural use, which the BPDA did demand, and the developer did grant at income-restricted prices. Another place is the Kwang Khao Community Center. It's often frequented by residents of Chinatown. And I'm going to turn it over to Ruben to show you some of the excellent data work he's done with Sophie and his team.
Yeah, this is the last slide. So actually, the GIS team, led by Alice Ziskin and also Jessica Meir, put together a urban renewal dashboard for us and for all of you. It's now public to look through. You can see just a screenshot here of the dashboard, but it'll allow you to see the total number of LDAs, and the types of LDAs. The number of income-restricted units, the number of square feet of open space. You can dig in by at the parcel level, the LDA level, at the district level as well, and learn more about that. So I would urge all of you to take the time if you want to know more about the LDAs that are in your districts or across the city. And so, tremendous work here by the GIS team. They did a lot. And just to close out the presentation, I think that just to sort of go back to something that Chris said before, we are seeking an extension. The extension has to come before March 31st. In order for the timing for us to work out, we are hoping the City Council could give us an approval before our March board meeting. The board meeting would be March 16th. So if the council is able to provide us that approval, we can go before the board, get board approval. Then we have to go and get DHCD approval, and that approval from DHCD has to come before that March 31st deadline. So that's all sort of the timeline we're working
Your board's the 16th of March?
Yeah. And with that, I will hand it back to the chair.
Is that our presentation?
Yeah.
Thank you. Just one quick question, then I'll pass it right along. Government and utility uses, could those be Edison Yards or there's 20 of them here. What are they, Chris?
There's a lot of there's T stations, and then there's T easements underneath Government Center.
Anything for Edison or National Grid or anything like that?
Not that doesn't pop in my mind, but we have pretty heavy data dive that we could get you that answer.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Flynn, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the panel for their presentation. I had the opportunity last week also to engage the BPDA team on this subject. So appreciate the update, the briefing, the informative information. One question I always go back to is, with any change that takes place or doesn't take place, what are some of the negative consequences that this could bring to low-income residents? Is there something that we're missing, that there could be a potential loophole that could impact low-income families, something that could be missed? Are we sure that we covered everything, that low-income families will not be hurt by any decisions or actions we take or we don't take?
I mean, I would just say that I think the only risk that we know of from these LDAs is the risk of them expiring. So I think that's, I don't think that there's any risk to low-income families for extending the urban renewal LDAs.
Yeah, for these LDAs that specifically cite those types of uses in the subsequent plans, that the reason for the planning was for that type of use, it would not be in their interest or our interest to make a change to those types of things. We want to keep families where they grew up and where they live currently and under the means that they currently live under. So I think to Ruben's point, the risk is solely, should the LDAs go away, we simply lose our leverage, we simply lose our seat at the table as a public agency to fight for maintaining income-restricted uses.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, yeah.
What impact would this have on particular neighborhoods? In my district and District 2, there are a lot of LDAs, certainly. What would the impact be on large apartment buildings where many immigrant neighbors live, subsidized housing, but what's the impact it would have on our immigrant neighbors in different neighborhoods?
Let me go. I would say, to just reiterate the point, essentially, that should these land dispositions go away, those folks could potentially be at risk of losing their housing when their third-party agreement expires. Or at the very least, the city of Boston as a whole would lose its renegotiation powers because we would have nothing to leverage. Right now, we have an LDA that says, hey, your site needs to be used for this. If that LDA is expired and the plan's expired, and the plan cites a certain type of use that belongs in a certain area, in a certain neighborhood, we don't have that leverage anymore because it's gone. If the plans are extended and the LDAs are subsequently extended for those particular sites, we have leverage to say that, hey, we played a part in this, maybe in the 60s and the 70s and 80s, with federal funding and city funding and state funding. So there's a public interest in those buildings to maintain them for public good. If one views that public good as an income-restricted or affordable or low to moderate families, multifamilies living in downtown neighborhoods that are under potential gentrification pressures, which I think most people here would view that as a public good, then it's our duty to maintain as much leverage as we can to keep folks in the city and where they currently live and where they're happy. I don't know.
Thank you. Again, I had an opportunity to ask questions and receive a briefing. I don't want to take any more of the time, other than to say, and I've stressed this in the past, I always like to know, and I think I referenced it in the first question, but I like to know what loophole there might be, or there might be a way for someone to maneuver around the system to their advantage at the expense of residents, at the expense of the city. Have we thought about everything as we discuss this matter, that there's no one that can benefit financially from this proposal, and that who's benefiting is residents in need, seniors, low-income families. That's who we're here to advocate for. I just don't want us to do something where down the road we figure out that there's some type of loophole where someone is able to benefit from this. That was always my concern. That was always my challenge. I want to make sure that we think of every potential and every question, and we come up with a response. So this is appropriate, and we're doing the best we can for the taxpayers.
I will say that anytime an LDA is amended, it has to be approved by the BPDA board, and oftentimes those amendments require minor modifications in which the city council gets notification, DHCD gets notification, and the Boston City Clerk is notified. So everyone will be aware if we were making a change to an individual LDA or structure of a parcel in some way.
So let me stay on that point then. The minor change to an LDA, why would that take place?
We would have a community meeting. We would get feedback from the surrounding community and the elected officials. An LDA may require a change. So say there's an LDA for a single family use and the individual, wanted to change it to a two-family use. We'd go out there, have a community meeting. The neighbors are okay with it. We could amend the LDA to allow for a two-family. Should that occur? Should the neighborhood want that?
The neighbors, just generally speaking, the neighbors might be okay with it, but is that, generally speaking, in the best interest of the residents of the city?
Yeah, it's something we weigh with our planning team. Anytime I amend an LDA, we go with the planning team, we get planning's opinion on whether or not that's acceptable in terms of density, in terms of impact, for whatever the change is, because a private landowner is allowed to amend an LDA or allowed to propose an amendment to an LDA, just like a zoning code, just like you can go to the ZBA and you can propose a variance. We are allowed to listen, and we're allowed to have community meetings. And sometimes we say no, sometimes we would say yes, depending on what we hear from the community, depending on what we hear from planning staff, depending on what we hear from elected officials.
And go through that process of making a minor modification to an LDA. What is the approval process?
It would be notification to the Boston City Council, City Council President, at-large city councilors, district city councilor in the neighborhood that's affected, DHCD, which sort of oversees us and the urban renewal aspects, the Boston City Clerk. In the South End, there's some extra responsibilities in terms of notifying other elected officials, state rep, state senator, and then doing public notices in one newspaper of general circulation, Boston Herald, South End News, the Banner, El Mundo. So we have to do public notice. You have to have a public meeting to do a minor modification, and it has to be advertised as such.
The vote would take place at the council, and then the vote would take place at the BPDA board.
The council's notified, the BPDA board votes on it, currently, how it's currently.
On a minor modification.
Yeah, that's a minor one.
Yeah.
Now, an LDA amendment could just be a board vote. And the difference would be if the LDA in the plan, like whatever the change is allowed, say they're going from 35 feet to 45 feet, and 45 feet is allowed in the urban renewal plan, then you wouldn't need a minor modification. You would just need an LDA amendment that sort of recognizes the new plan proposed.
Let me ask one final question. Have there been cases in the past where residents were not as engaged in the process as they should have been on minor LDA changes, and then down the road they figured out that there were some changes to an LDA impacting the neighborhood? Has that happened before?
I'm not aware of any specific examples of that. What I have learned is that lots of people don't know what an LDA is. But if something is proposed that has an LDA, all of a sudden, a lot of people know what an LDA is, and they know, and they remember why that LDA is in place, and how much that property was sold for, and why that use restriction is there. So I think it's a little bit of the opposite in the sense that folks are very in tune when you say urban renewal. People get their ears up because of the history, and there is a lot of attention on any sort of LDA amendment or minor modification that I've experienced anyways.
My final point. So, Chris, actually before the pandemic, you did a lot of community outreach with the residents and had meetings in the neighborhoods, and residents, and on Zoom during the pandemic, and residents found these hearings, as you mentioned, very informative, especially in the South End where I represent. Is this something we could continue going forward, is bringing this presentation, which I think is excellent, but bringing this presentation to various neighborhoods across the city? Because as you mentioned, residents are interested in this subject, but whether it impacts them or doesn't impact them, it's a interesting subject that many people in Boston want to hear about.
Yeah, we went to every neighborhood twice, sometimes more. People really like talking about the history of the city because they've experienced a lot of longtime residents. They're interested in the architecture and the changes made and the progress made, and just they're interested in learning about how we became the city that we are today, good and bad. So with permission, I guess I would go back out and do this type of presentation in the neighborhoods interested, just so that they know the impacts that urban renewal had on them, good and bad, because it's just public knowledge, it's being transparent. So yeah, I would agree.
Well, thank you, Chris. And when you presented to the neighborhoods, at various neighborhoods, you were in South End, you were in Roxbury, you were in Charlestown, you were in other neighborhoods, it was a great image also for the BPDA to be in the neighborhoods, because they really weren't used to that type of communication, that type of neighborhood interaction. But you being kind of a representative of the department, talking to residents, listening to residents, and explaining things, I think it went over very well. And I think residents appreciated it. They learned a lot from it, as we both said. Just something that maybe we can continue working on. Mr. Chair, I have no further comments.
Thank you. Now, you're not looking for that to go up to the neighborhood before the vote?
No.
Okay. Councilor Wong?
Sure, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I was just clicking around in the web tool, so thank you guys so much for providing that. It's super informative, and I think, like, you know, it illustrates, obviously my district has a lot fewer of these than a number of the other districts, but it's just, I think, an illustration that even in my district, the fact that one of the residential income restrictions that would go away, there's 200 income restricted residential units in my district that we would lose if we just lost the LDA precipitously. The 146 of them are all in the same building. It's at 100 Norway in the East Fens, and that's called Moorville House, and it's a major elderly development that kind of anchors Symphony Park in the East Fenway. And it's definitely like a major center for us. We did a lot of work with food access and stuff in the pandemic there. And I mean, that's just, you know, that's just 146 units, which compared to the like 12,000 that you're talking about citywide is a smaller number. But I appreciate being able to see that, and also being able to see that those ones specifically are the group that would expire it with the expiration of the plan. Like, they're not, I think there's another set of like 52 units in my district here that would kind of hold on for a little bit longer. But it's helpful to see this, because I think it underscores for me the kind of like squaring of the circle has always been, I think that a lot of folks in the city are ready for the urban renewal plans to sunset, from the perspective of they don't want the BPDA sort of like coming in all of a sudden with kind of, you know, like with the type of powers that were used during urban renewal, and they don't want their property to be threatened in that way. And I think that, like, you know, the era of that is past, but it's still reasonable for people to be concerned about, like, these kind of tools. And so for me, the question's always been, like, how do you reorient, like, away from that sort of what people's perception of a threat, but not lose the like income restrictions and some of these other things. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit to, like, my understanding from kind of parsing the press is that basically the idea of the home rule petition you guys are filing is that it would allow us to kind of like sunset the urban renewal plans in terms of new actions, but then maintain these long-term protections, and that's what you're asking the council to sort of like wait on being able to do by extending it for 2 years. But I just wondered if you could like make that a little bit clearer, or speak to that a little bit more.
So through the chair to Councilor Bach, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, that sort of what we're asking you to wait for, what would replace these? Are you asking a little bit about some of the questions I was asking or comments I was making with respect to what the home rule petition would replace it with?
Yeah, but not at the whole level of the agency, more
Okay.
just kind of specifically, because we're talking about urban renewal plans today. I know we'll have the whole GovOps process around the HRP,
Okay.
but just trying to understand, like, I guess I'm trying to confirm my understanding, which is that the ask today is to extend these plans because the way all the plans are written is that if they expire, the LDAs expire. And what you guys are showing us in this presentation is we don't want the LDAs to expire. I agree with that. Another example I was clicking on of like an elderly building is 224 Stewart, which is in Bay Village. I grew up like visiting. It's a largely Chinese elderly development, right? That's another example, just like Morville House, something we definitely don't want to lose. I'm like 1,000% sold on that, right? So I just want to be clear though that the case that you're making is because the LDAs expire with the UR plans, don't let the UR plans expire, extend them for 2 years. But then if the legislation passed, then we would be able to preserve the land disposition agreements. It would give you a mechanism for that without maintaining the urban renewal districts as such. Because for instance, in Fenway, when I look at this map, there's a little scattering of LDAs. There's a much larger area inside the district. So can you just speak to that?
You've got it exactly right, Councilor, through the chair to Councilor Bach. You absolutely got it exactly right. Assuming that we do get approval at within this body and then with the legislature, we will be able to continue the LDAs, and we'll have a series of powers that you were alluding to separately. You've got it exactly right.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to confirm that because I do think for people, right, like it's sort of, I think the LDA case kind of makes itself in these slides. But I think that question about kind of like, you know, how long do the powers exist in the district and is there a way to sunset those separately is a part of what people are talking about. I'll just say two other, you know, in sort of the edge of Councillor Flynn's district, my district, obviously the state's looking to redevelop the Hurley building. That's an area where we've got LDAs and I certainly have an interest. Love the state, but I feel like in this case, the state is sort of in the position of the private developer vis-a-vis the Hurley building, and we're sort of in the position of thinking about what's in the interest of the public. And so, it, you know, it means a lot to me to maintain some protections there. And then just a shout out to the Boston Public Market because I was there for lunch. And I know that the only reason we have the Boston Public Market is because there was an LDA saying that there had to be a market on that site. I had one of the crepes from the little, yeah, this is very good. Yeah, so just, you know, just wanted to stress, I appreciate this data because I feel like this is what we were looking for this time last year when we discussed this topic. And it's very helpful to me to be able to drill down on each of the ones in my district. So thank you guys for that. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yep, also.
Councilor Murphy?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation and the dashboard, like Councilor Bach was saying. You really did a good job explaining. One question before I have a comment. The open space. Are most of those, or all of those, what we refer to as like the vacant lots around the city that we've put up fences around, and then we have to make sure we keep them clean and shovel in front of them? Or are they included in that list of open spaces?
Sorry, what was the last part of the question?
Are the majority of the open spaces what many people would be consider like vacant lots that the city owns?
I mean, they're all privately owned. The city doesn't own any of them,
Okay, so
but
they're all privately.
there's a lot of side yards, backyards, connected to homes from the 60s and 70s. They were kind of sold to give a little bit more of a suburban feel in the city, as that was the time period. That was the trend in those days. So a lot of them are fenced in, landscaped,
Yep.
open space, but buildable. As of right. The ones that I've come across in Roxbury and Charlestown are basically backyards and side yards that individuals are looking, or developers are looking to maximize profit and put a 3-family on it, and then some of the neighbors bristle because it's what's in it for them.
So if this
visibly.
expired, those open spaces could then lose that protection?
They-
They'd still have to go through zoning, like
You'd have
you
to go through
explained.
zoning, but a lot of
that's
the-
a big protection.
Yeah, a lot of the proposals that I've seen anyways, like developers are aware of these LDAs, and they're trying to do
And the
as of
timeline.
right projects and trying to tell me, well, Chris, it's as of right. But we do our best to listen to the neighborhood.
There are some that are city-owned as well.
Okay, but within okay. So you did a wonderful job explaining to all the people watching, but if you could just kind of connect the dots for myself too of, we're in February and Mayor Wu announces that we're going to sunset urban renewal, we're going to wind down, and then we have this chart here where we're then asking for an extension, and we're here about to be expired. And kind of like what Councilor Bach was saying, in some ways, it seems to many that we're trying to not sunset and keep it going because we realize, oh, wait, no, we're going to lose all of these protections to very important things. Like, I agree, we need to make sure that, restricted income and senior housing stays intact for our residents. And so could you just explain how we got here? If we, in the spring, we're kind of boldly saying that we're sunsetting urban renewal, and we're going to move on from, like you have been mentioning, Chris, the bad that came out of that and the reputation that had.
So through the chair to Councilor Murphy, I guess I would say that anytime you sort of approach a legislative action, what you want to do is take the time it takes to actually write a home rule petition, in this case, that takes all the actions in the right sequence based on good legal research. And because it's connected to other things that the agency is doing and other ways we're trying to change it, the plan was to take the time it takes to put together a good home rule petition. So that time took us until late January. We are now asking this body to approve a home rule petition that would change it. But while it's being duly considered by this body and the legislature, both of whom have got the right to look at it and make sure that confirm their understanding of it. We didn't want any of we wanted to make sure that while you were having your due and appropriate deliberation, there wasn't a risk to anybody about losing their housing or losing a backyard or losing their senior preference. I think the mayor talked about this last year, wanting to extend so we could get to the place we're at. And now that we're here, we're wanting to make sure that this body has a chance to consider and without anybody being impacted.
And one last question, because it's a legal question, thinking back, when these deals are made, 100 years seems like forever out, and anyone who's agreeing knows they're not going to be here, so maybe you have a different opinion. But we're coming up to many of these agreements. The years have passed. Was there some legal agreement, or the owner made some, they gave up something to offer this, or did they not? So now they're saying, well, why are you now trying to extend these restrictions on our ownership, if at some point when they bought it, were they,
Oh, I see.
do you get what I'm saying? Like,
Expecting it to end.
just checking to make sure that the homeowner didn't, say, sell it for less, knowing that they would be able to give this benefit to the city. They offered it for 100 years, and now the 100 years is up. And are we going to now force it to stay even though the time has expired?
Sure. I think in those instances, first of all, I think a lot of land was conveyed at less than a fair market or a true market value, I would say, in the first instance. And so there was a benefit received by the developer, which was part of the bargain for these covenants. The LDAs give us a seat at the table and leverage as these covenants expire, but it's certainly conceivable. That would be a negotiation at that point still. There is, by state law, the covenants are limited to a 30-year term, which then can be extended for an additional 20-year term, so it's really 50 years for affordable housing, and it would be a negotiation like anything else, but having the leverage and the ability to have a seat at the table and to insert ourselves really into that decision is
So it will be
really what
one
we'll
at
have.
a time, like
Yes.
each one you'll have to go in front
As
of.
they, yes.
But if we
Yeah.
approve it, you will keep that leverage along with additional zoning or existing zoning already in place.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And I just would say, when you go back through the history and you go through all these deeds that we went through, most of them were sold below market rate for a specific reason. That's why we put the restriction on there. Below market rate, it has to be open space. Below market rate, it has to be single-family owner occupied.
Seniors, yeah.
Below market rate, income restricted. So those are the reasons people had those restrictions, because it was below the market at the time.
Awesome. Thank you. That's all, Chair. I'm good.
Councilor Boucher?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to everyone for being here and for this presentation. I echo my colleague's statement saying that this is a lot of the information that we were looking for last year, and so I'm happy that we have it. I just want to confirm that last year there was also discussion of there were some of these that we were allowing to sunset. So between the last time you were here and now, how many have sunset?
We sunset 2 last year. It would be the downtown one, Central Business District, School Franklin, and Boylston, Essex. There were others considered.
I believe there were 3 or 4 that you were asked that you were saying
Yeah,
to sunset.
we looked at 6
Yeah.
that could have been sunset. We chose 2 of them to sunset. They were sunset. The other 4, we just continued to analyze.
Are they part of this extension request?
They're part of this extension, yeah.
And can you specify why those 4, which we thought we were able to sunset?
It varies per reason. Like, we looked at cell station, and we looked at, climate resiliency, the flooding and stuff like that. We go, maybe it'd be worth it to sort of maintain LDA protections and our powers in that area versus not. Campus high school, honestly, we looked at it, a lot of affordability, and we realized that we didn't really have access to these third-party documents last year, these third-party agreements, and we really collaborated.
Why didn't we, if we're a named party to the agreement?
We were not a party to the agreement.
We're not.
We're not. So, but in the LDA, we're a part of that project, right? How it got developed. And me and Ruben and Zach and everybody, we went to Mayor's Office of Housing and really sort of dug into their sort of archives and sort of figured out everything that they learned or what they're afraid of. So we sort of said, well, we might as well just keep all of these, because in all of them, there's some risk, right? Like in Brunswick King, you're going to lose a lot of open space, but not a lot of affordability. In Fenway, you're going to lose a lot of elderly preference, but not a lot of open space. And so we were just like, maybe it's the best path forward to maintain as many restrictions as we can.
But so just so that I'm clear, for a lot of these, for all of these, the majority of these LDAs, the BPDA, BRA is a signatory, it's an agreement between the BPDA and another private entity.
All of the things all the data that you saw came from a parcel or private entity that has a land disposition agreement from us to them, and we analyze that.
Okay, I was just curious because you said we didn't have them in our possession, which is like if we're a signatory.
So the third party, like affordability documents, they're not our documents, so we went to various places to sort of find them and review them.
But don't they run with the land, so wouldn't they be also filed with the deed?
They would, yeah. Can I just
But we
jump in
didn't
and
do
clarify?
that.
Yeah, so we are certainly a party to the LDAs. We are the benefiting party. We are not a party to what we call generally the covenants, which are typically, let's say, a mass housing doc that would be an agreement between the developer and the state. Those, we are not a party to those. They are on record with the deed, but I think it took some time to build up the records maybe that we didn't have in place, and Chris and Ruben and Zach and the team have done that work now.
If I can add that one of the major projects of the last year was taking documents from the state, taking documents from MOH, and actually aligning them and determining what matched up to the income restrictions that we had in our LDAs. And we were actually able to see a lot better over the last year where those third-party protections fell, because we didn't know as much a year ago when we started the process.
Great, thank you. But just so that I'm clear, so that everyone at home is clear, is that all these covenants that run, regardless of the period of time that they run, like if I wanted to find them on Mass Land Records and I put in the address, I should be able to pull up these covenants, even if I'm not gonna, I won't see the LDA, for example, filed, but I'd see whatever the covenants are that are running with the property.
Correct. You should see the LDA and the covenant in each
Okay.
case. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then just so there was some data presented about the number of income restricted units that would be protected. Should we make the decision to extend the urban renewal in these situations? Would all of the units that are protected, are they all income restricted, or are there some market rate units that end up being protected as a result of our extension? And what proportion? Because we only have here the income restricted, and would be curious to know what that percentage would be.
So on page 6 of the presentation, the total LDA counts, there are over 20,500 total residential units that are protected by LDAs. Nearly 12,000, 11,700 of those are income restricted.
So one more time, sorry.
Sorry, so if you're on the LDA total counts slide,
Yep.
I think we're 2 slides before that, a couple slides before that. Yeah. So 20,530, so you see the third row.
Yep.
That's the total number of residential units
Yep.
that are protected by LDAs. And then the next slide shows just the income restricted units, 11,748. So more than half.
Okay, but only slightly more than half.
Yeah.
Yeah. But can you explain what are those other half that are market rate, and why are they receiving protection?
The market rate LDAs, they could be things like single family occupancies only. They could be things like owner occupancy only uses. They could be things like height, FAR, that is different from the zoning code.
And are these LDAs, are they signed? Like, could it be between the BPDA or the BRA and an individual homeowner? Is that what we're talking about as well?
Like my parents have an LDA on their parcel where my grandfather bought a house. The agreement was he had to rehabilitate it. He could live in it at a little bit below market rate, but it had to be a single family, and it had to have a backyard that was open. So that was his personal agreement.
Something that I'd be curious to know is sort of the identity of LDAs. If we looked at all of our LDAs, who is the main, like, is it a nonprofit corporation? Is it, like, what does the identity tend to look like? What is the span of the identity of LDAs?
Yeah, I think we did that work. We, where best we could find it, we put it in the air table so we could provide that.
Yeah, through the chair, if we could get that information, I'd appreciate that. And lastly, I'd like to say that, I think showing that a lot of, maybe if I did the math, it's slightly under 60% that are income, of the units protected would be income restricted. So like more than not extending this would have a benefit on income restricted, but it's still not it's not 80% or it's not 100%. And so when we're thinking about how we're protecting the public good, I, query whether that's, whether we're maximizing the use of the BPDA when we're extending these protections to units that are not income restricted. And so I guess what is the long-term solution here so that we don't have to, is there a long-term solution to these issues so that we are not sitting here discussing extending this, which, can be triggering for a lot of people who live in, and as you stated, people, when they hear urban renewal, want to think about their own experience, want to think about West End, want to think about the ways in which the city has really failed, and think about the public investment part. And so what is the long-term objective here?
So I think through the chair to Council Lieutenant, I would say that the long-term objective here is through the Home Rule Petition to protect all of our, all the people who are protected by the LDAs, whether they're income-restricted folks, folks in senior buildings, folks who have other kinds of, I don't think we want to disrupt people whose ownership might be crucial to them as part of something they bought or acquired during the original point. But I think what we're trying to accomplish with the use of these tools is to align them better with a set of futuristic uses. The reasons that people could use the elements of the powers of redevelopment authority were very much aligned with money that the federal government was making available for that use. So at the time, the federal government was making money available through the predecessor of HUD to take, to demolish things, to build certain kinds of housing, to build certain kinds of other buildings. And I think those were the old reasons. I think that what we're trying to do is replace those reasons with reasons that have to do with the next 60 years, like maintaining affordability, making sure the city's resilient to climate change and its impacts, making sure that we're creating social equity through our development plans. So that's the long-term goal. Macro with the changes we're proposing. On a sort of more narrow basis with respect to these LDAs, I think we're just trying to make sure that people who have come to anticipate an affordable housing, senior, open space, or other benefit are continuing to receive it and aren't being disrupted, I think is the sort of longer-term goal as it pertains to LDAs.
Thank you, Chief Jemison. So just so that I'm clear, it's replacing the reasons, but not necessarily replacing the tools.
That's right.
Okay, thank you, and thank you to you all for being here. If I have any further questions, I will bring them to the chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Help me to go through a timeline here from 1957 to now. Tell me just 3 points in terms of what happened. From 1957, at some point, Brian Golden, and now. And then there were plans. There were extensions for urban renewal, and they were all supposed to reduce powers or somehow, right? Figure out how to preserve the affordable rental, affordable units, but yet reduce some level of power. Little by little, we'll say. And I want to make it very plain because I don't understand these things. I don't work for the BPDA or BRA, and I want to really understand it. Tell me what happened. What's the timeline? From the time you started saying, we got to do it differently, we evicted a bunch of people, not you guys before your time, but 1957, we start doing this. West End, then Brian Golden went and did his apology, remember that? And then he came in, like when he came in 2000, what was it, 14 or something, then he went and did an apology at the West End Museum. Nobody in Roxbury got an apology, but that's okay. And all of this pain and all this hurt, you guys always bring in your speech. I get it. Tell me though, when you started figuring out, BPDA, the BRA did a lot of harm. BPDA is doing the best that we can to preserve or to preserve these affordable units. Tell me, from the time you started planning, from the time that Michelle Wu was a counselor, and she voted to extend it so you guys can make those plans. What happened?
There you go.
So through the chair to Councilor Fernandez-Anderson, I guess the best version of it I could do would be sort of, so extend my understanding backwards a little bit. So probably, I want to say the beginning of last year, or middle point of that last year when I joined, we were operating under a one-year extension of the urban renewal of these LDAs. And a directive I received was that we can't cause or allow Bostonians to be threatened by losing affordability that they've come to have. So the directive was, we need to do that. We also need to figure out whether or not the powers that are authorized by the reasons I shared should be extended, or what means we should take, because we can't afford to have Bostonians lose these benefits. So that's how we got to where we are today. So working backwards, I understand that in the beginning of 2021, there was a rather, robust debate about whether they should be extended for the year before. And a decision was made that I think gave the initial charge to Chris and others to do the beginning of the research that you're seeing, I think, pretty well presented today. I think prior to that, I do remember the apology from then Director Golden, and which again I think started this dialogue about, well, how would we sunset this? What are all of the LDAs? At that time, I think while we had certain LDAs, the layers of individual financing agreements that I think have been alluded to here, that are the other covenants that we are not party to, we didn't have all that. So I think that was probably the initial launch of that investigation. But I think prior to that, Urban Renewal was really a sort of a rather obscure set of knowledge that was used occasionally to authorize individual actions. I think best known among these would probably be the use of the demonstration area power underneath the Urban Renewal rules. So, and then that gets you, a lot of other things happen, but I think that gets you back to 57 in your chronology. At least the chronology of changing it. Sorry.
You want me to try? No.
No. Thank you. But did you have more to offer? Sorry.
No, I was just curious. So 1957, obviously, a lot of bad things happened. People were lied to. People were hurt. Families were displaced. Communities were displaced, and it was terrible and awful.
And then the 70s?
In the 60s and 70s, the federal government basically cut funding to.
And then the 80s?
To urban renewal, so it made it really, really difficult to develop.
And then the 90s, a lot of
to multiple multiple recessions, so many
went
bad.
into Roxbury,
Yeah.
and then 2000,
Not a lot of good things happened.
and then a lot of good things happened, and then 2022.
So the last 6 years, what we've been doing is really trying to demystify urban renewal. We, 6 years ago, we didn't really know where any of these LDAs were. And we found them. And over the course of the last year, this team has done a really good job reviewing them and analyzing them and see who would be hurt if they were to go away.
Do you think that your powers and bureaucracies in place now, do you think that they don't just perpetuate itself more power? Or do you think that it can actually work fairly to all communities? Do you think the way that urban renewal is set up right now, and BPDA and all your policies, do you think that it can work fairly for all communities and equitably?
So through the chair to Councilor Fernandez, I do. I do.
As it stands right now?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, can you tell me, I think Councilor Lujan alluded to this, but you have a list of the properties that are under LDA that are not affordable housing?
Yes, we have any urban renewal parcel, we have that data. Like we have the deed, the LDA, the square footage, the plan proposed, the location. It's all part of our public.
Can you send me that spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Do you guys collect land rent on these properties?
I'm sorry. Do we collect land rent? No. So these parcels have been sold to private landowners. These are not parcels that we still own. And
None of these properties you collect land rent, not one.
not on the ones we're talking about today. We do own property that we collect rent on, but the urban renewal parcels that for the LDA review, land disposed, we don't own them, so we don't collect rent on those.
Can I interject? Thank you, Councillor. Chris is right. We do not collect rent because these properties, the underlying fee has been transferred. We don't own them anymore. There are certain properties where we do collect incremental value payments. And it varies. It's not all properties. These guys can speak a little bit more to the details, but there are certain buildings in Charlestown, for example, where when a condo sells, a fee of 2% is owed to the BPDA or the BRA. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but I want to make sure we're being clear about it.
Is that because of the LDAs? Excuse me.
Yes, correct, yes.
Like what you had spoke about in the South End earlier?
Yes.
You have those in place all
So-
along, if it's an LDA?
Yeah, a majority of them are in the Navy Yard. The Navy Yard was not in great shape when we acquired it, so we sold it at a very low price, and in the LDA, we put the 2% fee in there to sort of recoup some of that public money.
You still have powers to go in and do the same, right? Take land by eminent domain, you could still do that?
We do.
And do you plan on doing it again?
So I have no immediate plans to use eminent domain to acquire anything. We have submitted a home rule petition which identifies a new set of reasons why use of eminent domain or any other powers may be something we'd like to retain the power to do. We named them resilience to, by way of example, if it became clear that in order to protect part of the city, we needed to build a seawall or needed to or think about the harbor, the water's edge, if we knew that we were going to be inundated by water and we could not induce a series of landowners to build a wall of their own resource, it may be important to protect the city for us to use eminent domain to take an area of land that's may actually be in the water today to construct a seawall. Those are things, I mean, that's a rather dramatic example, but that is an example that we think we need to retain the power to use eminent domain for. But I do not have any interest or desire to recommend to the board the use of eminent domain for any other reason. I should add that the mayor's written an executive order, which our board intends to adopt coming up on Thursday, that will say explicitly that we're going to only use those things that were submitted in the home rule petition as the gateways to using any of those powers.
You don't have any immediate plans. Is there anything in Roxbury that you're thinking about that you could possibly have a plan for in the future to take?
It's a pretty broad question. I have no.
Is there any
immediate
land in
plans.
Roxbury that you are thinking that there's a possibility that you could have a plan to take in the future?
No.
No land, great. And so, is there any property, like private, that you plan on going for in D7?
Could you further define the word going for?
So, obtain, purchase, then sell, transfer, take by way of whatever powers you have? In D7?
Not that I'm aware of.
No development plans, no land that you're going to go for in D7 that you said, you know what, that's not under our purview right now, but we could go for that one and develop it.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Counselor? I assume you're asking, and I think Chief Jemison's answers are predicated on your question relating to privately owned land.
That too? Or, yes?
Okay. So it's not unusual for there to be for example, there to be an overhang of a piece of property into the right-of-way for a building that either exists already or may be going to be constructed, some small number of feet. From time to time, that kind of thing does take place. Maybe there's a desire to close a street. I don't have any plans of that kind in Roxbury today, but there's plans to close a street. It may be more expeditious to, have us take that piece of property through a friendly taking, and that way more quickly expedite the closure of a street. There are occasional needs to do things like that, but that's the extent that, in my full imagination, that we might need to use eminent domain for.
Okay, Mr. President, I'll yield my time and ask my second round. Thank
I'm
you.
not the president, but
Mr. Chair,
thank you. You're all done?
yes, thank you.
Okay, if you need more questions, I'm going to do a couple questions. You're more than welcome to stay. Eminent domain that doesn't just sit with just you, right? What would that process look like? Like if you want to take a side parcel that's close to a train station that you want to, something like that,
Through the chair, with permission.
What would that
I'll let
look
General
like?
Counsel answer that.
Sorry, trying to get my own microphone working, I apologize. I don't believe that the agency has ever used eminent domain powers outside of its urban renewal powers. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, so what would a regular eminent domain
Yeah,
look like?
the sort of power that, yeah, sure. We would, we've never done it, so I haven't thought that much
So
about the
if it
process.
were in
There'd be-
urban renewal, it would be different
We
from
would
a
use our
rule
urban
it would
renewal
outside.
powers, yes. There's a procedure there. We have not conducted an adversarial taking against a private party in quite some time. I'm looking for the folks who have looked at the data. Yeah, that was before my time.
1980, I think.
1980. What we do now tends to be, for example, there are a couple of projects where we likely will acquire property from the state to assemble a parcel that has been put out through a request for proposals to build something. So that really, or the sort of routine takings that Chief Jemison described of, an overhang of a building that needs to go out over the sidewalk. So we take the air rights on a consensual basis against the city.
But I mean, eminent domain, wouldn't that, I know if the state does it, it's a legislative act. Is that correct?
I
Do have
believe that
wrong?
is correct, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
so because you guys have the urban renewal powers, it wouldn't come in front of us as a legislative body.
Correct.
You would just make that decision.
Well, because we would be using the urban renewal powers, correct?
Yeah, okay.
Yes. And/or our demonstration project powers, yes.
Okay. And just like an opinion back to when we were, this initial extension, when it was Brian Golden and you guys went out to the neighborhoods to try to explain urban renewal, I found a lot of it to be, the arguments to be dated. Everybody talking about what happened in the West End. It was, and all around 50-something years ago, when we haven't seen any of those behaviors, we haven't seen any of those takens. And I think we had mentioned in the 80s was the last eminent domain taking. So I don't know what even point I'm trying to make, but I remember going in and listening to the South End talking about the New York streets, and the New York streets were done in the 50s also. I don't think anybody in the room actually remembered the New York streets. There was 2 people maybe that did, but most people are just reading from it and said that was a disgrace what happened. I think we can all agree it was a disgrace that happened, shouldn't have happened. But let me ask specifically, Chris, on this Concord house. That's got the LDA in the back with the parking on it. What was, because I had got called to a meeting, did the developer want to develop on the parking? Whatever happened with all that in terms of the LDA and how were we able to protect that neighborhood there?
The LDA still exists for the current project that.
So how are they looking to build on an LDA that was for parking? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, they would petition us, they would ask for an LDA amendment. A part of that LDA is this parking lot and subsequent little small park. They're asking to build market rate units on there, so they'll get a new LDA or an amended LDA. And in return, I suppose there would need to be some sort of public good done, and I think they're trying to think about.
Is that still in the mix?
I think it's still,
I believe there is a pending request from the developer, yes.
Yeah, so they're requesting to change this LDA so they can, so they can build.
they're also in a U district, which makes it slightly unique. So they get their zoning from the U district tool. So they get their zoning is essentially in a regulatory agreement or an LDA directly with the BPDA.
Okay, I just want to read a couple letters into the record. One from Council Lara, District 6. I am regrettably unable to attend today's committee due to a BPS appointment for my son. I understand the importance of today's discussion on urban renewal. My team and I will work with this body, administration, and the community on tangible solutions. Transforming the BPDA is an enormous endeavor, and we must ensure a robust and impactful community process occurs to get this right. We can't afford to build a new system that doesn't bring Bostonians into the fold. Kendra Lara. And then also from Gabriel Coletta, I regret to inform you that I will be absent from today's committee hearing on docket 0324 on February 13, 2023 due to previous commitment. Kindly read this letter into the record. I support the 2-year extension, so that's a good one, on urban renewal plans due to hundreds of land disposition LDAs that would be lost without extension. The loss of the LDAs would greatly impact communities like Charlestown, South End, Roxbury. They will also primarily impact low-income and senior residents. In addition, long-term reforms of urban renewal is necessary to better utilize its tools to prioritize resiliency, affordability, and equity. Thank you. So if we grant the extension and the home rule petition does not pass, do we continue with extensions in a year or 2 years? Do we have a backup plan on that, or bifurcate the legislation a little bit for less? I'm not sure if we have any.
Right now, our best plan is getting the home rule petition to pass in some form so that it amends and updates this sort of antiquated approach.
And then we would be able to sunset the urban renewal
Then we'd be able to.
plans?
Then we'd be able to. We'd have the ability to do that without losing our LDAs.
The LDAs, which is the main thing. And I think one of the areas was the Brunswick King, and there were a couple lots there that were owned by families that were interested in, holding on to it. So that was one of the reasons why. That was one that was identified to sunset, but there were some pretty sticky situations in particular in that. Did I have that right, Chris?
Yeah, there was a question about taxes. It was because the LDA restricted its open space, the city would tax it at a lower rate than versus a residential space when
So we're not looking to sunset any of these here now? And how many do we have?
12 urban renewal areas.
12, okay. We sunset a couple last year, didn't we?
2.
2 of them. Okay. Councilor Park, do you have any more questions?
Sure.
No, Mr. Chair, I'm fine.
You sure?
I mean,
Nope, she's done, okay. Councilor Fernandez Anderson, do you have any more questions?
Yes, thank you. Not President, sure. So I wanted to get to, I'm sorry, sometimes we don't sleep well, and today I have not had coffee, and it's late to have coffee, so I'll just try to bear with me with my question. I'm trying to figure out the properties that are not affordable units under the LDA. What happens to that? Do you profit at all from them?
Through the chair to Councilor Fernandez Anderson, I do not believe so. We don't own them other than the transaction that was described wherein when they, in some of them, but actually, I think, let me make sure I understand your question. The ones that are not affordable.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I think that there are probably at least 1 or 2 cases, I think you highlighted one of them, Chris, where something that's controlled by an LDA and has within it units that are not affordable. When they sell, there's in some cases there's a 2% charge that comes back to the agency. I think that was already explained. I may not have explained it correctly, but I think it was explained.
Just like an example.
You explained something about it went to kids, and then you said Roxbury loudly.
Yeah, so
I appreciated that. Can you explain to me what the 2% is?
So the 2% is an incremental value fee that's basically recoups public dollars that went into a site at some point. So we owned it at some point, or a public body owned it at some point, and we sold it for a set price, usually below market. And then 50 years later, someone takes a single family, knocks it down, and builds 3 single families, and they bought that land for $50,000 in the 80s or whenever they bought it from us. So we would ask for an incremental value fee because we sold it to you for 1 single family, not 3 single families. We sold it to a family, not to a developer. But now 50 years later, that family's selling it to a developer because City of Boston's just, it's a place that a lot of people want to live. So the developer's looking to make money, right? So because there's public funds, were public funds involved in us acquiring it, we assess an incremental value fee for the units created beyond those which were agreed upon in the original land disposition agreement. So the original LDA says 1 single family. New LDA is going to say 3 single family row houses attached, and we will assess an incremental value fee to make up for the money that you didn't give us in the 80s. We don't charge you for the single family that you paid for. It doesn't matter what the price is. But the brand new ones, there's a formula, it's called 15, 4, and 2. We charge you $15,000 for a new single family created, another $15,000 for second single family created, and then 4% on the first sale, 2% on every sale after that. And that is the process for that's the process to stop developers from basically swooping in on what was public land and making a whole bunch of money.
Can you send me the breakdown of the properties under the LDAs that could be
That have
susceptible
been-
to that?
Yes, so it would be anyone that had been amended in the past and value was created after the fact.
And then I guess about the plan, at some point, you're going to be working on, I'm not clear, you're going to be working on sunsetting? Because I heard this last year, right? We had this conversation, and I was like, and I understand, like, I get it. There's a lot of changes and stuff, and I was just trying to figure out, okay, so where are we? Are you going to work on sunsetting, or is it just going to be like, let's just, the point of the urban renewal is to renew itself?
So through the chair to Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, so I think hopefully we've established that if we sunsetted them now, people could lose their housing.
Got it.
So we're not going to sunset them until the risk of sunsetting them and people losing their housing is gone away.
Yes. It's not 2 years, though. You're asking for...
No, we're hoping it's 2 years. If the legislature passes the Home Rule Petition, then we ought to be fine. But if it doesn't, I'm going to come back here and ask for whatever it takes to prevent people from being displaced.
Because the legislation speaks to the LDAs and us being able to retain control of the LDAs
Right.
in the legislation, in that Home Rule Petition.
Right,
Which is the most important thing for us in these urban renewal.
100%. So so there is a risk that we do not act to sunset. There's a 100% likelihood that I will not recommend an action to sunset until I can protect the people who are affected by this.
I guess the question really is, will you be working on the plan to protect the people that you're talking about?
We've worked on it. We submitted it to the council. And hopefully the council will agree with it and then send it to the legislature.
Sorry, you've worked on the plan to sunset?
Yes, we submitted a Home Rule Petition which says that if this body agrees to it and it goes to the legislature, I'll have the right to sort of no longer use urban renewal justifications to act. I'll also have the right to protect all the people who are protected by the LDAs.
What else does it do? That's why we're here, right? Like, my job is to get the information to the people. We're in a hearing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asking you to clarify exactly what the plan is.
So the plan is to ask the legislature to update the reasons that we can use our powers to acquire property in the private market, to use concessionary tax agreements, to use eminent domain, other powers, so that it's only usable for the 3 things we mention all the time: resilience, affordability, and equity. And I also ask for the right to extend or retain LDAs that allow me to continue to have people who have the benefits of whether they're senior preference or affordable housing or their existing backyards.
So if you don't have any more land because Mayor Wu's going to give it away for free, then you're going to acquire private property so you can protect the people that are in affordable housing?
I don't,
So for example, there's a bunch of property that need rehabilitation or need to be rehabbed in D7. You're going to have the power to be able to purchase them, right? To be able to come after them and help them? Or
With eminent domain, you're talking? Like private properties?
I thought I heard you say that acquire private property. I'm using the words you're using.
oh yeah, absolutely. We are currently, if we make a finding of blight, decadence, or substandard housing, and it's in an existing urban renewal area, today, we have the right to do a series of things, one of which is to buy that property. I think I've shared earlier, I have no intent to do that, but that's also why I need to update we need to have a home rule petition that updates our powers here and with the legislature.
And if updated, you will keep those powers, right?
I'll keep the power to
Purchase?
purchase property, do concessionary tax agreements, et cetera, only when I make a finding that those things would advance resilience, affordability, or equity.
And because BPDA, BRA, Urban Renewal has done so much harm and evicted people and led to the death of working class and middle class and black and brown people, you don't want to cause further harm, right? So there's a program somehow that you're thinking about that can provide funding so people can fix their property without selling it to you? Or is the option just to sell it to you?
I guess I don't.
Let's say it's blighted, say it needs
you're-
fixing. Is there a program in place, 2% money, every other monies that from garages, most of your money comes from like other sources, right? So not the land that Mayor Wu's gonna give away. So I'm wondering, all the monies that come in through BPDA, can we create a program that you can give back money to people of Boston to fix their property so you don't have to buy those blighted properties? So you can actually help them fix it and stay and keep it. Because even when you purchase it, sometimes it doesn't necessarily protect them from displacement.
So, to my knowledge, through the chair to Councilor Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, my understanding is MOH has a series of programs that do fund people's home repair and people's ability to repair their homes through
There's not enough
federal
money.
sources.
There's not enough money there. They ran out last year. There's not enough money. So I think that's something that I would like to talk to you about, how we can undo harms and do it differently so that we don't have to displace people. I think that even purchasing blight or other ways, you know what I imagine? I imagine that a lot of developers are looking at this market of old housing that does have affordable rentals in there, and they see that as open market. They see that as an opportunity, and like a buffet. Whoa, we could purchase these properties, and people can't fix them, they can't afford them anymore. So more developers will come in and own Boston and own black and brown communities, because by way of blight, we continue to take them out of people's hands, poor people that can't fix them, and we'll put them in the market, or we'll fix it, or we'll figure it out. But in those processes, I think we have to be really careful, and I'm just asking, have we thought about programs that actually helps them keep their property, but not necessarily take it or purchase it? Because the city of Boston does not have it, the program does not have enough money to go around. I help people obtain those applications all the time.
Mm-hmm. So through the chair, I think I'd like to sort of separate out the different parts of what you're saying, because each of them sort of has its own, each of them is different. Chief Dillon has an organization that has a very significant new capital that it is spending to help people who own homes. In my space, you were citing a concern that developers are looking at properties in your district and saying, I would like to buy them. I can't speak for all of them. What I can say is the ones that are protected by LDAs are not going to be bought, and they're going to be protected. So, again, I'm interested in talking with you about ways that we can, that probably Sheila, because she's the person who has the resources for this, can help you most in this way. And I'm interested in talking with you about preserving the people's tenancy and people's ownership that's been obtained through the LDAs we have, and also the fact that our proposed home rule petition will, I think, address many of the concerns that you have. Happy to talk to you about those things.
Thank you, Chief. I think you're right. I think I'm talking about two different programs or sections here, and I think that the city has too many bureaucratic red tapes. The policies are stupid. They don't allow poor little old lady somewhere on Blue Hill Ave to fix her property because of the red tapes, right? Because her taxes are not in order, because issues that she faces. So this happens with small business help, with housing, and then we run out of funds in these small programs. So we have a beautiful website that offers all of these programs. And we're talking about urban renewal, but this is a wonderful opportunity to say, hey, BPDA, you got a lot of money. Can we talk about programs that helps these things on a more, preemptive, more preventative, as opposed to reactionary? And that's what we do as a city because we're so busy and inundated with all of the things that we have to do. So I would like to work with you on that. I think that, I can speak for myself, but I think that you have the votes to get this done. But then how long will we have reactionary conversations? And that's why you hear my response in this way. In terms of reactionary, I see your face squinting a little. And I guess I mean that it's reactionary because it's like sort of close to the deadline. And now we're like, wait, we gotta protect this. So we do this thing but we don't actually have a plan to actually undo the harm. That's not preventative, that's more reactionary, and I think that's where you hear that. But we don't have to agree, we just hopefully agree on programs that will help people in the future.
You okay?
I think so. Thank
Okay.
you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, we don't have plans, like just owning a rundown building doesn't mean that the BRA, Chris isn't out looking around for rundown buildings to go and take over, is he? Chris, are you looking for? Because I actually have a couple buildings that I'd like you to go in and take over if you would, but.
I did intern at ISD once.
Did you? Yeah, I see the days of taking any land, or even to use the word blight in 90% of Boston, I don't think is correct. But those are old terminologies. And the plan, so back to the point of Councilor Anderson was asking about the plan. The plan is the legislation that we have going up the State House, which is a separate docket, which will be heard in here under government ops. So thank you. No further questions. I'm going to look to probably report this out. If not this Wednesday, the following Wednesday. I'd like to take the temperature of some of my colleagues that I didn't hear from, just to make sure that they were all comfortable with it. With that, thank you everyone for your time. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you. Oh, we have one Zoom. You guys can go and I'll listen to the Zoom. Can I let them go?
What's a Zoom question?
I have to re-gavel in.
We can listen to a Zoom question.
Huh?
I can listen to a Zoom question.
Yeah, okay. I have to sorry about that. I jumped the gun. We have a Zoom. Welcome to the 21st century. Sorry. I apologize for that. There is no public testimony, just one person on Zoom. Juan.
Oh, Catherine, that's one.
Hi, Catherine. You just let us know who you are and your affiliation, and then you can start. 3 minutes, please.
Hi, my name's Catherine Desmond. I'd like to speak to you about how my business and our clients and our tenants mandated participation in the Article 80 process involving the building at 155 North Beacon Street that we have leased for 32 years, was illegally suppressed by the BPDA and several city offices regarding our business being documented as a vital component and mandated to be included in this Article 80 process of negotiations regarding the displacement of our 38-year-old Boston business and our 300-plus clients, many whom are small Boston businesses. I've tried to reach out to the mayor's office and the planning board for almost a year surrounding the negotiations regarding the development of this building and the mandated inclusion of us as a company and our tenants in the negotiations and the mitigation. And I believe that this Article 80 process was illegally and improperly mitigated by several City Hall offices and a fraudulent third-party City Hall employee's private company, excluding our mayor's office documented vital cultural asset and anchor institution status, and written City Council mandates that said our company and our clients were to be included in the mitigation and the negotiations. The 300 polled signed documents of hundreds of the Sound Museum tenants and Allston Brighton small businesses requested by the city and the proponent and delivered to the proponent and the city supporting our sustainability were suppressed and not adhered to the Article 80 documentation by the BPDA. Our company and our clients not being allowed for 6 months to participate as mandated in the mitigation and negotiations ultimately resulted in the complete opposite of the city, insisting on our business and our client sustainability. This backroom mitigation deal we were shut out of resulted in the voices and the choices of hundreds of displaced musicians and dozens of Boston businesses being silenced, and the city who instead demanded a free building and a carbon copy of our proprietary intellectual property and our trade secrets of our rehearsal and music makerspace business built for the city in said free building as mitigation, while our business and our clients were stolen and handed over to the chief of MOAC's romantic partner, who was our competitor. We believe we were criminally excluded from the process by a group of Art Council members with an agenda to steal our business and our clients away from us. Kara Elliott Ortega, chief of MOAC, who we originally contacted to address our and the hundreds of businesses we provided for as makerspace as displacement, did not recuse herself from the negotiations regarding the relocation and the rebuilding of our rehearsal business, even though she is and has been intimate partners with our direct competition. The Art Council group of city offices involved in this mitigation put our competitors on the IAG, the Impact Assessment Group, ignored our correspondences for communication throughout the mitigation process we were mandated to be included in, and empowered a third-party private entity, who's also a City Hall employee, who works as a senior newsletter writer at City Hall and is not a representative or a member of our music community, to interfere with the negotiations, even though the City Hall says, and I have this documented multiple times to us, that they were not working with or affiliated with Amy Bennett or Art Stays Here in the Article 80 process. Yet they still let her be involved in in the mitigation and the negotiations. This third party, Amy Bennett of Art Stays Here,
Catherine, do you have an opinion on the extension of urban renewal? That's what this hearing is on.
Well, this has to do with displacement. So I believe that, and I'm also trying to...
Okay, you can finish your statement, please. Quick.
Okay. So Amy Bennett of Art Stays Here, which is not a legal business, and she is not part of and did not represent the 350 musicians and small businesses that were displaced, that we have served for 40 years, and we have documented proof that they asked us to represent them in the mitigation Article 80 process. I believe the Article 80 process and many, many other tenants believe this was 100% corrupt, infiltrated by an unqualified third party, and there was collusion by several offices of employees of City Hall to help the chief of MOAC separate our business and our clients from us and hand them over in the management and funding for the temporary space mandated by MOAC To Cara Ella Ortega's publicly acknowledged and romantic partner, Matt MacArthur of the Rehearsal Business, a record company, with the help of local developers, Court Center Partners. We feel this is a criminal conflict of interest and a huge ethics violation, and are in the process of preparing to litigate against these individuals and this City Hall-wide criminal behavior. So thank you for your time. I would appreciate to be able to discuss this with the offices that this is involved in, rather than have to testify with 3 minutes online, because this is a serious issue.
Thank you, Catherine. Okay, I think with that, do you have anything else?
Catherine, I would offer that you email our offices to schedule a meeting to discuss anything further.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.